hesitating, we're hesitating.
Okay, I hope so. I hope so. I have an assistant, thank you, who will then entertain you.
Wait, we'll stay back here.
Okay.
Michael, if you're
Hoberman, the toast
under the light a little bit, yeah, or behind the light.
Is that right? Okay.
With his lassie.
This is scripted. I won't be ad-libbing, just so you know. Many of you know that I earned my keep as a literature professor. I assume that the reason I've never been asked to deliver this toast until now has been exactly that. People who are in the mood to enjoy one another's company and celebrate a poet's legacy don't want professional critics to ruin their fun. You don't want a jargon-spraying, theory-splaining, self-important egghead who's also a white male to tell you why all of your ideas about Robert Burns.
Wait, are you trying to turn that on?
No, so they can see.
Thank you.
You don't want an egghead to tell you
No, turn it off.
that all your ideas about Robert Burns, not to mention your lovely notions about lassies and lads, are factually incorrect and ideologically reprehensible. I respect and admire Patricia for having avoided this result for several years, and I'm only sorry that you ran out of fitting candidates and had to resort to asking me this year. Don't worry, I have no intention of inflicting my professional expertise on you tonight, though. Quite the opposite. I want to tell you about a chastening episode that occurred during an early stage of my professional training. When it came to the subject of lassies, as you will discover, my pretenses to expertise proved nearly fatal. I found myself in a situation in which I was being tested, literally, and I barely survived the ordeal. Usually in their third or fourth year of study, PhD candidates in literature are called upon to prepare for and sit through a series of exams. At UMass, the exam is called the Three Areas exam. In it, the candidate, in consultation with faculty advisors, devises a long list of both primary and secondary sources that pertain, as the name of the exam suggests, to three particular areas of the candidate's interest. The candidate prepares a written rationale for each list and is then subjected to an oral exam or defense on each of the areas. 19th century American women's writing was one of the areas I'd chosen. I had newly nascent feminist proclivities. I was developing some promising theories about how the work of women writers during the post-Civil War period could be understood as an attempt to redeem America's failure to confront its many moral shortcomings, including the ones that had resulted in the war itself. The two most prominent authors on my list were Harriet Beecher Stowe and Emily Dickinson. Among the several poems by Emily Dickinson that I wanted to be tested on was poem number 35. As you know, her poems she didn't give them titles. Number 35, the one that begins with the line, "Nobody knows this little rose." It's a lovely poem. I arranged to have a copy of it placed in the folder of works that my examiners would receive from the department assistant ahead of my exam. On the day of the exam, I sat down. I was ready to roll. I had been preparing for years for this. Just before we were due to get going, though, I noticed that Professor X, the committee chair, had a strange look on her face. She was undoubtedly sympathetic to my case. She'd supported me for years to getting to this point, but it was clear to me from her troubled expression that I'd made some major mistake somewhere recently that I didn't know about. "Michael," she said, "I want to hear more about the basis for your statements about empowered women in the post-bellum period. In your rationale," she explained, "you made the following claim," and I quote, "Post-Civil War American women asserted their poetic authority by inverting and challenging traditional feminine motifs. You said that Emily Dickinson's poetry operated according to this principle. What I don't understand," Professor X said, "is how you could possibly raise such a point or argue it with this poem about the rose as a piece of evidence. It just doesn't add up." Well, I'd studied that Dickinson poem very carefully, and I was certain that my claim did add up. So when she handed me a piece of paper with a poem printed on it, I figured, okay, I've prematurely panicked, it's going to be fine. I'd be able to straighten the situation out and make my feminist argument. I looked down at the page, expecting to see "Nobody knows this little rose." Instead of Dickinson's familiar Yankee quatrains, however, I saw something totally alien. This poem was full of misspellings,
Wow.
apostrophes, words I couldn't make out at all. I was at a total loss. Had the department assistant put the wrong poem in my packet? That's what must have happened. I was about to be examined on a poem I'd never seen. Well, there was nothing I could do about it. I had no idea what it was, who had written this poem, but I had to think fast and figure out how to use it as the basis for the feminist argument that I was committed to making and had been touting to my professors. I'll read the poem to you.
Sing it. Sing it.
Oh, my louvre's like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my louvre's like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. As fair as art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in Louvre am I. And I will louvre thee still, my dear, till the seas gang dry. Till a seas gang dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun. Oh, I will louvre thee still, my dear, while the sands o' life shall run. And fare thee weel, my only Louvre, and fare thee weel a while, and I will come again, my Louvre, though it were 10,000 mile. Okay, here goes, I thought, and I tried not to let the look on my face betray my bewilderment. The references to wheels in the final stanza of a poem I began enunciate the speaker's most important statements about women. We all know the speaker is saying that women make the world go around, and that their ingenuity and dynamism is necessary to our survival and advancement as a species. We're talking not only about childbirth here, i.e. the act that gets us all rolling, or motherhood, but all manner of acts of invention and especially of initiative. Without women, we men would be stuck. Men square off against each other and preen and boast of their ability and expertise. Worse still, we wax poetically about the importance of precedent and tradition. This is how we've always done it, is the quintessential male statement. And that statement has justified centuries of regressive behaviors and policies. It stands to reason, then, I said, that the poet speaks so forthrightly in this final stanza about wheels. I went on to say that the repetition of the word wheels was actually replicating the motion of wheels. The poet wants us to understand and appreciate the fact that women keep us moving and ensure the forward progress of humanity. From the looks on all three professors' faces, I have been speaking gibberish. Professor X was frowning into her cup of coffee. Professor Y was shaking her head. The look on Professor Z's face was similar to the look that Lindsey Graham gets on his face every time he hears a Democrat refer to John McCain. You know that look. I'm sure you've all been in situations like this in which you know you've done something terribly foolish, but you should stop in your tracks, but you decide the only course is to forge ahead, come what might. Moreover, I continued, the speaker's continual references to fairness, fair, in that final stanza, in juxtaposition with the repeated utterances about wheels, suggests that an association is being drawn between the dynamism of women and their consistent representation of justice and decency in the world. Think about it, I said, and my voice was gaining more confidence in spite of the fact that I had no idea what I was talking about. Think about how often men in life declare their content with the way things are and their acceptance of the status quo. Women refuse to acquiesce to such things. This is true in connection with income equality. It's true with reference to race prejudice. It's true with when gender inequity is ascendant, and it's true when homophobes try to impose their will on society. Whether men lack a principle of fairness or are just too lazy to challenge unfairness, it's typically the bonny lasses. I suddenly and inadvertently started using the language of the poem. The bonny lasses they're the ones who insist upon proper redress for everyone. They alone, I practically shouted, can be counted to put their shoulders to the wheel. By this time, Professor X had checked out completely. I couldn't tell if she was asleep or praying, but she was no longer rooting for me. Later, I found out that she filed for retirement that day. Evidently, my performance was the final straw. Without checking to see how Y and Z were doing, I blundered onward. Note, I said, that this speaker is so eager to represent the feminine attributes of fairness that the poem contains 2 distinct spellings of the word. Fair, fair. Furthermore, the second stanza first refers to the female figure as fair, and then in a supremely bold move associates her with art. I was hitting my stride now. It no longer mattered to me what X, Y, or Z thought. I know you've heard the joke. What does PhD stand for? Piled higher and deeper. How can we fail to take note of the speaker's associations between women and art, I asked. In stanza 1, after all, we are told about melodies and tunes. The speaker is stopping at nothing in the attempt to valorize the female imagination and to assert a critical equivalency between lassies and all that is good in the world. There was definitely no turning back at this point. I decided to wrap the whole thing up with one final disquisition on the worthiness of lassies. But now I abandoned the poem and chose instead to speak from direct experience. Here's to the lassies who not only tolerate foolishness and stubbornness and boringness in lads, but frequently go out of their way to transform their tolerance into kindness and encouragement. The greatest gift the lassies give is that of their appreciation of exactly who we are as lads when we deserve to be appreciated. Here's to the lassies who understand better than we that patience and cleverness and careful consideration of everyone's needs and talents and experiences is a key to accomplishing good and great things. Here's to the lassies whose sense of humor, skepticism, and ability to assess situations from the widest perspective stands as the most effective corrective for our tendencies as lads to act before we have thought carefully about things. Here's to the lassies whose very existence makes the world a meaningful place, as opposed to a place where we just do stuff because we like to do stuff. Here's to the lassies who help to teach us that relationships and communication can always be improved. Here's to the lassies who know how to look at things carefully, who are talented at listening, whose ability to pay attention and to act on the information that they acquire by paying attention is more often than not the thing that saves many of us lads from destroying ourselves and the world around us through the mistakes we are so hell-bent on making on a daily basis. Here's to the lassies who frequently understand but also have the good sense to admit when they don't understand. And finally, here's to the lassies who excel at the art of delineation, who know how to read critically, and whose ability to distinguish personalities and situations results in the proliferation of wisdom and kindness in the world. Here's to the lassies. Here's to the
I just want to say,
well done.
old nature's apprenticed hand she placed on man, but then she made the lassies of
Oh, yes. So that was very interesting, Michael. Thank you.
I've heard those words before.
But here's the part that Michael did not tell you. It was during this 3 areas exam that we first met. I, in fact, was Professor X. He doesn't like to mention it because it would kind of seem to be a conflict of interest, and you know how people are about those kinds of things, me being the committee chair and all. But you see, it's worked out, and I do like to keep my academic ambidexterity on the lowdown. But I remember that day very well. My colleagues and I had not had a chance to meet Michael before his 3-area exam, but we'd heard about this earnest and hard-working lad who was said to be quite bright. So when he came into the room wearing torn and rotting shorts, hair a curly wild tree, shirt misbuttoned, it was clear that we were encountering a true poet himself. So minded not the strands of straw and hay strewing in his wake, nor the goaty slipstream. Presentation is what we in the UMass doctorate program have casually come to consider the true Area 1 for scoring purposes of the 3 areas exam. For this, we gave him a pass. Area 2 we considered to be preparedness. And as young Hoberman had arrived early, and clearly having prearranged the provision of the poem he was soon to explicate, I was feeling quite ready to give him a pass in that category as well. As soon as I took the poem from the envelope, however, I was shocked, stunned, and appalled at his impudence. That he could argue early feminist poetic authority in the post-Civil War era using what was clearly a Robert Burns poem. Robert Burns! Robert Burns, who went through women like dish towels. Robert Burns, the rabble Burns, the womanizer Burns. I pointed out as much, but his steady, even keel caused me to pause, and I bade him begin. But I must say, once he began, he really did seem to know what he was talking about. He spoke with such ease and passion and on such a deep plane, soaring concepts I'd never heard addressed with such feminist anglings. And this from a male. As my feathers unruffed, I made my own realization. This young man was not simply speaking to us of Robert Burns. He was Robert Burns. He was a Parliament poet. The words Sir Walter Scott had once spoken of Robert Burns suddenly came to me, and now I could see it. And I quoth, his person was strong and robust. His manners rustic, not clownish, a sort of dignified plainness and simplicity, which received part of its effect perhaps from the knowledge of his extraordinary talents. The eye alone, as Sir Walter Scott said, the eye alone, I think, indicated the poetical character and temperament. Realizing young Hoberman had, in fact, come prepared, not just with theory, but rather in embodiment, caused me to then and there quietly insist to my colleagues that we pass our poet for Area 2 of the exam as well. So at this point, I sat back to listen closely. For one can wax poetic and hypothesize and argue in grand and lyrical diction, but these are not mastery. And mastery, my friends, is what qualifies a pass for Area 3. So as he continued with his explication of Robert Burns' jingoistic rose poem as a way of untying the dialectic within the feminist inklings of Emily Dickinson's poem 35, aka the Rose poem, I listened with an air of expectation and trust. And suddenly, it hit me. Here before us was the answer to the question. If we can share the male and female character qualities of both Robert Burns and Emily Dickinson, we can embody the gender balance. So as quickly as I could, I signaled to Professors Y and Z that we ought immediately go into closed session, which we did, and without hesitation, in an unprecedented academic action, we passed young Hoberman with top scores in his first true area of interest, as well as his second and third, sight unseen. I left the room immediately and went on to hand in my resignation. As I had received during the exam a sort of inspiration or revelation, no, divination. And that evening I began my research into what would prove to be my greatest inquiry toward future discoveries. In looking into the binary nature of humans, I discovered that in fact, Robert Burns had been born Roberta Burns. As it turns out, early on, Roberta had, unsurprisingly, experienced the muting of her words by nearly everyone around her. She had found such discomfort with the societal constraints of female identity that as soon as she left home, she became emboldened to give not just words but full expression to an altar voice. and with their ability to wear a kilt, whenever the spirit moved them, they went forward to become the great poet we celebrate tonight, Robert Burns. And as my suspicions then inclined me, I went on to discover that Emily Dickinson had in fact been born Emilio. And in their desire for solitude gave ease to the inclinations and took to the skirt. So here is where I toast the laddies. Younger sirs and older gents, heed ye all where they have went. And who are they, ye ask bemused? Why, thy other part, the one unused. No, no, not we, your lassies fair, but thy bestest portion, 'tis deeply there. The part of thee that knows compassion, ye need not hold it back nor ration. The part of thee that cleans the dish, that gives and thinks before the wish. The other side is not one half, they is enmeshed with good and bad. They sometimes speak and sometimes stew, but knows to stand for overview. They stand they do to change the quo, the patriarchal undertow, the one-way current of the flow. It's all in there, we know you know. We know whene'er you show you care, when we be ill and you are there, when life is tired and you step up, when you are tired and voice as much, when you admit that you are wrong, when you see us as true and strong, when you embrace the lass within, then shall the richest part begin.
So when did you fall in love?
How much of that is true?
None.
None.
Zero.
I did go to UMass for my PhD.
That's it. That's the
And
You're obviously a good bullshit.
there is something called a 3 R's exam.
Yes, okay.
American